Thank you for joining us on episode 34. Today we head to Berlin for an update from Bennet Cerven of the Trouble Notes, and we feature a couple of their songs titled Ballad of Trouble and Sound River.
How are things with you, dude?
Yeah, man. I'm okay enough, I guess.
Yeah?
Yeah. I mean, in 2020, I'm alive. So I guess when you're alive, that's that's enough to start the conversation off from a positive note if you can somehow.
Yeah, but winter is coming, my friend.
Yes, it is indeed. And with that, all the fun challenges that are upon us.
I worry about the dining situation and how that's going to work. I mean, especially in the States with transmission being so high. When they close outdoor dining because it's 20 below Fahrenheit, are they going to keep doing indoor dining? Are people going to be going in? I'm so frustrated.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess I mean, of course, I'm not innocent because here especially in Berlin, we're starting to see places organize things indoors.
But your transmission is very different and your rate of infection is very different than what we're seeing in the States, correct?
Well, it was. I mean, it's the Berlin is starting to claim that it's that our rate is rising. I mean, I think to give you an update on what happened here really is that Europe basically we pushed that infection rate down to extremely low and manageable levels. I think since the last time we spoke. So when we spoke already, the rate was dropping significantly.
Let me just introduce you really quick since we're already just going right into it. This is Bennet Cerven from the Trouble Notes, and Bennet is in Germany. And last we spoke was April 11th. So just a few weeks into America's shutdown. So when you have outbreaks or infections there, what does that look like relative to the 40 or 50,000 new cases that the United States are seeing a day with around 1,000 deaths? I just want to compare and contrast that before we jump into it.
What they're claiming right now is that Europe is in fact experiencing about 40 to 50,000 new cases per day as well. But that's as a continent, right? So Europe does have 150 more million people, likely, maybe even more. I don't remember. My current numbers could be off, but I think the European Union is about 550 million.
And look it up.
The U.S. is what they record is 360 or something like that. So it's got at least 100 million more.
Yep, you're accurate on that, almost to a T.
I love it when I get things right. That's good.
Fact checking you in real time.
Yeah, it's good, man. It needs to be done,
Yeah, well, I'm curious too because I never actually thought about the population of Europe as a whole. And with that said, you guys have 150 million more,
right?
And your infection rate is, you're saying, about 40 or 50,000 new cases of transmission a day.
There's an argument to be made that we're on par with what's happening in the U.S. right now. There's a few big differences that are critical. So the first is that it took a long time for us to get back to this point. And it mainly happened because there was just a lot of people moving around and going on vacation. And, there's not been massive events, although I've definitely been at some. For example, we were in the Czech Republic just 2 weeks ago, and we were playing on a stage in the center on a festival. And, it was like nothing happened there. There was nobody, not a single person wore a mask. There was 1,000 people dancing in front of the stage. I didn't expect it to be like that at all. When we went there, we were expecting it to be like a lot of the other events that we'd played where, a lot of cities were doing city fests where they were having chairs, split so you could sit in pairs and you had to wear a mask, when you were up and moving around. And if you had your seat, then it was okay to take that mask off if it was outside. But if it was inside, then it was masked all the time. And so, I think that for a while, it seemed like it was kind of going away. And of course, we knew that it was always going to come back. But there's no question that, Europe's not been perfect in the way that they've handled it either. And there's massive reasons for that. One is the European Union politically is an absolute disaster. I mean, there's no federal government here, right? So you can't have a unified plan for the EU. And it was painfully obvious. Every country basically is making its own regulations. They're changing them every single day based on real-time data. And you can't really stop anybody from crossing borders because it's really anti-EU in its core, right? And you can't stop the flow of supplies and, you know, the interconnectivity. I mean, we even have shared power grids here. So like, how can you just like close off all the borders? And is that really what you want to do? That's another whole case in point. So, you know, Europe handled it really well, I think, in the spring. And then people are kind of just are like over it now, you know, and like in Germany as well. I mean, here in Berlin, we had mass demonstrations like in the center of Berlin. And, you know, there's 20, 30,000 people that were there. They stormed the Reichstag, you know, with, like in the US, it's like all walks of life. You have like these far left groups that think that everything is like, you know, the state trying to control them. And then you have all the far right groups that are basically saying the same thing, you know, that this is mind control from a communist government and blah, 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 whatever, all this BS rhetoric. I mean, QAnon is here too, man. So it's terrifying, you know.
It is. I actually thought a lot of the things were just uniquely American, and maybe that's my closed-minded worldview. But I actually held the world, the rest of the rest of the world in a higher regard than I do the United States, especially when it comes to, you know, the argument of personal freedoms during a pandemic when all you're being asked is to wear a mask and keep away from people. You know, I really thought this was more of a uniquely American thing. I did see some of the protests, the mask protests popping up. I'm mortified to hear that QAnon is a worldwide thing. That's I mean, like apparently Germany has like the second highest rate of followership, which is doesn't shock me.
Numbers from no, I mean it should be the UK, but you know, I mean I'm a little bit disappointed that it's you know it's here, but whatever. But you know, but the thing is they claim for example, that like you know Merkel is one of the people that eats adrenaline glands as well, and like you know that it's pretty awesome. I mean, why not? You know what I mean? Boris Johnson and Trump. Like I have a friend who's a massive conspiracy theorist. I won't tell you who it is because you know him, and I was like talking with him. He didn't know anything about QAnon. And so he like believes in all the other ones, you know, like all sorts of stuff that, you know, every time that something happens, there's somebody tinkering. And so I told him like, okay, you know what QAnon's about, right? And he's like, not really. And I explained to him what QAnon was about. And I mean, I swear to you, I'd never seen someone laugh that hard. Like he literally wet himself laughing.
That is great because
so absurd.
That's great because I had a similar experience. I've got a friend who is a huge conspiracy theorist. Everything's a conspiracy. Lizard people eating babies, you know, the pedophile rings, all of that. He didn't know what QAnon was. I told him about it, and then he was like, "Yep, fully in." Just moved his chips right in. He was like, "Yep, sounds good."
Yeah, my friend was the opposite. He saw this and was like, "Eating children? What?"
Like, that's maddening. Is it just the manipulation of information? Is it a lack of education? Is it both? How can something like QAnon that's so far out there take roots across the world like this? What is it that's contributing to this?
So I saw an excellent documentary that was done by DW, which is Deutsche Welle, so it's like German World, and they do a documentary series sometimes in addition to news, you know, obviously. And this documentary was fascinating because they had it's about an hour long. It's in English actually, and they break down the rise in conspiracy theories and why they think that, like in the last 3 or 4 years in particular, but it's been going on before, that you know human beings have this inclination to find a conspiracy in things, and basically there was this behavioral psychologist who was saying that you know the problem with the human brain is that what we do is we try to organize chaos all the time. And so what's happened is that like now that information and the news cycle has gotten so outrageous, we're being bombarded with a lot of information that frankly we just don't need. Like people don't need to know that, you know, every single day so-and-so is dying, and they don't need to know about what's happening over here and what's happening over there. And they're constantly being told about all these things that are happening simultaneously, much of which has almost no effect on their life. And so what starts to happen is through that chaos, they start looking for ways to connect it all together in order to make sense of it. And that's what a lot of these conspiracy theories do, is they make loose connections between things that are frankly random, and they make them seem somehow that they're not random. You know,
it also makes people feel empowered, as if they have some sort of answers to things that, frankly, answers may not be accessible for some of these things to the general population.
I think in a lot of these cases, the answer is that the world is just chaotic and effed up, and people just don't want to accept that. You know, that so Chester Bennington and their favorite musicians, you know, they couldn't have died because they were living a stressed out life on the road all the time, you know, and taking tons of drugs and quelling their fears and anxieties. No, they died because they were going to expose a pedophile ring, right? Like there's always got to be a reason why something happened, because that, like, it's just the way that a lot of human minds like want to make clear data.
It's interesting just that it's a lot of uneducated people who think they have all of the answers, which is very hard to watch. You know, somebody who has a hard time putting thoughts into sentences, trying to explain QAnon or anything else to you, and it's
Flat Earth is my favorite.
Oh man,
that's the one. The first time that it happened, I thought the guy was joking. Like we sat down,
love it.
It's like he was like, yeah, you know, like I met this guy in France, by the way. In France, we're sitting down and at a bar, and we're having this conversation, and he basically makes this like, yeah, you know, I used to go through a lot of stress, and like I was worried about my life, and he goes, now I feel a lot better, and I take comfort from the fact that like I know that the earth is flat. And I'm like, what? You know, and it was like I didn't want to be, because of the way he introduced it. I was like, okay, like if I go at this guy and I try to rip down his worldview, like I'm just going to destroy him. You know what I mean?
You're going to take away his comfort.
I sat there and I listened to it, and I was like, yeah, explain it to me. Like I've never heard this before. And he just came at me with all the facts, and I was like, I want to undress all this, but like I don't think there's a point. Like I don't think you're going to listen to me anyway. Right. So I just kind of was like, yeah, okay, it's things for me to consider. I'll read the book, you know, and then like I walked away like, holy shit, like we're really having this conversation. This is insane.
So I think that's kind of where everything is at politically, too. Like even in the United States, it's what you're talking about is people with two completely contrasting viewpoints. There's information out there about whether or not the world is flat. And can two people who disagree so fundamentally have conversations that will be productive, where there's listening, education, admission of being wrong? Can that happen? I read your post that you posted a couple of hours ago. What prompted that post? And do you want to kind of give people a little bit of maybe just what you were talking about?
Yeah, sure. Well, the post I think was prompted by the fact that, look, I mean, I'm a very politically active person, but I try to keep it off social media. Frankly, I think social media is a cesspool, and I mean, there's a lot of reasons why, but that's not really the point. So I had this really terrible feeling when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, and it's not because, quite honestly, I just want to take the politics out of it, you know, for a moment. It's just like what I saw was, you know, beyond the blatant hypocrisy that would happen if, you know, a nomination was made and a candidate was pushed through in the last 40 days, considering what happened, you know, in the last 9 months
with Merrick Garland
administration.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Like
it's going to happen, though. I mean, we're looking at it.
The point is that I believe that this is ultimately going to be the thing that you don't come back from, because I think that the blatant partisanship of this one, which will fundamentally change the outlook of the country for the next 20 to 30 years, whether or not you agree with it or not, is irrelevant to me. Like that is just the facts. The facts are that given the historical context, you know, that this would ultimately, I believe that without something drastic changing, that there would almost certainly be some form of a civil war or some really massive unrest that makes the 1960s, you know, look like a kindergarten and like a scrap on the playground. Do you know what I mean? Like it's something really bad is coming. And so with that in mind, with having woken up that and having that really heavily sit on my mind, I then saw the remarks that were made. I heard them that were made about Ilham Omar. And, you know, I don't want to interject my own political thoughts too much into this, because I think it takes away from the argument that I'm making, which is ultimately that forget about whether or not you like her, forget about whether or not you're Democrat or Republican or left or right or whatever it is. The parallels to really dark moments in history like the 1930s, which is what I used as an example, are horrifying. And I tried to deny them for a long time. When a lot of my friends were standing out there and saying, oh, this is Trump's a Nazi, he's fascist, he's this, I was always like, hey, yo, cool your jets, okay? Because ultimately you're creating potentially, a dangerous situation by backing them into a corner.
When people compare politicians or movements to Hitler or the Nazi movement, it often cheapens the argument, because most of the time what's being compared pales in comparison. You're not seeing the deaths of millions. You're not seeing the direct level of fascism. And for the first time in my life, there are things that can directly be compared to what took place in Germany.
Exactly.
And I don't think it's a cheap conversation anymore to compare the two. In fact, I think that there's direct crossover.
100%. I mean, it really, for me, that those arguments and that comparison became valid this year with basically, and this is what I say in the post is, obviously I live here in Germany. I'm also a student of history. I quite like it. And it was never sitting well with me, the rhetoric that was coming out of the president's mouth, ever. But frankly, as he was attacking the left, and as he started to take a candidate like Joe Biden, who has been nothing but a centrist, or if anything, like a more like liberal Republican for his entire political career, and he's basically trying to paint him as like this radical Antifa communist. This is absurd. Like, it's just there's no basis in reality for these arguments, and this is exactly word for word what was done by the Nazi Party. That they provoked violence, and then in the response to that violence, which is what is happening, they painted with a very broad brush all of their enemies and basically convinced 40% of the population, which is about what he has, that they were in the moral high ground, and that all these other people were basically there to destroy, take away, to put them in a position where they were weak, because Germany, in the historical context, had just come out of the First World War. They went through a very, very, very dark, terrible period of depression and shame. And this was a man that said, I'm going to make Germany great again. And he knew exactly who to blame. And so, I see those parallels. I think that there's no denying that they exist. And frankly, I think the only way to overcome it is not to actually go direct head on and say, I'm going to fight fire with fire, but actually to appeal to a lot of the people that are blindly following and saying, yo, you need to see what it is that's going on right now, and actually step back for a moment and look at where you stand. You are, whether or not you realize it, you are standing in the audience in Nuremberg right now. And
what's tough is it's hard to get folks to look at very clear information, even under the premise that they may agree with that information, which is ridiculous. It's hard to get people to engage. I have people that I love that will likely vote for Trump, and that's really hard to sort, because the people who I know that are going to vote for him are uninformed, don't even share his values, and it's become more of a team sport, which
yeah, exactly.
America loves. America loves a team sport.
Yeah. Well, and the problem is that he's actually convinced not only do they love a team sport, but they love an underdog. And he's convinced his 40% that they are the underdog. That we're the deplorables, we're the hated, the forgotten, and I think that for me is where you see really the fault line, the problem, is that those people are banding together, and they're actually convinced that that, and looking around, that that they're part of a movement. They're part of this great underdog story that will prove to the world that, we are not to be forgotten and we will not be replaced, as was so elegantly said by the Charlottesville protesters.
Did you hear Trump talk about refusing to say that he would peacefully transfer power if he lost in the election? And he's talking about getting rid of ballots and that power wouldn't be transferred and his power would remain. Did you hear those comments?
I did, and not only that, but I've already heard him say that if there was a fair election, he would win. So it's not even like, I think this is the point, is like, for me, what the greatest crime that he's committed of all is essentially that he's taken the election system and completely taken the integrity out of it. That whether he wins or loses, it doesn't matter. He's damaged the sanctity of a democratic election within a republic forever.
Whoever thought that it would be like a fraudulent used car salesman that just like wanders in, not articulate, not informed on any policy or politics or anything. And that would be what would bring down the perceived American democratic system.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I have talked about this before. I don't think it's him. I think that this problem is far more deep rooted. However, I think he is. Listen, he is unintelligent in a lot of ways, but he is very, very intelligent about one thing, and that is that he understands how to manipulate. He's manipulated his entire life. If you look at his business ventures, if you look at the way that he's used the media to build his profile, he understands how to rule through chaos. And I think that there is, I've always said that I'll tip my cap to him on that like he's a very, very, very worthy adversary in that regard, because he's, other politicians cannot survive what he has because he has no shame, he has no remorse, and he understands how to deflect. The minute that a real scandal comes up, he's got the answer on how to deflect away from it. And I mean, he's really, really, really brilliant in his manipulation of the public interest and of his followers.
Well, when I hear him, I don't hear what he has to say. I don't hear his manipulations and think, oh, that makes sense. I mean, most of the time it is absolute nonsense, absolute misdirection. And again, I would go back to, is it education that is failing us and that is leaving us in a position where somebody like this could, tell you that the sky is green and you're going to believe it even though you can see the sky and it's blue.
So I think that America's problem in general is education. I think that it's the problem of why there are a lot of racial problems. I think it's the reason why there's so much economic inequality. I think it's the reason why there's so much xenophobia. I think that education is the Achilles heel of the USA without question. And you could make the argument that I'm not even necessarily talking entirely about public schools, but I'm also talking about the fact that the American home is broken for many people. Maybe they're not a great student, but they're still not learning. They're not learning how to learn. That's another thing. You know what I mean? I heard somebody say, "Oh yeah, like it's all about I learn more from YouTube than I do in school." And it's like, yeah, but that's not the point. Like the point isn't, you don't go to school to learn fact. You go into school to learn how to learn. Basically, that's what it's about. And that's our failure. Is that we're not questioning things. We don't understand how to look at it. Like you basically see something and say, well, that's bullshit. Like I can tell that's bullshit. And if maybe I'll even fact check it myself just to check, to make sure. And you understand which facts to check to understand whether or not it's valid. I've had conversations with people where the entire premise of what they're saying is built on a fact that hasn't been checked that's wrong. And you can have a 30-minute debate with them, and at the end you're like, yeah, but you're not understanding. I understand how you got here, but the whole premise that you've built your argument on is incorrect, and here's how I can prove that. But they don't understand how to go through that process of like basically fact checking the very pillars on which they're building up their worldview. And that's, I think, what's unfortunately happened with a lot of Trump supporters.
It's extremely frustrating. I can tell you, I'm not an educated person. I view myself as the average American. And to see so many, quote, average Americans or people all over the world just eating up this information that is just garbage and the way that it's being processed, I think for me, that's been the biggest mind fuck Twilight Zone type situation in all of this is the way that people are processing information. And for some reason, I thought that people were either more intelligent, more receptive, or more able to sort through fact and fiction. And we're finding that not to be the case. And every single day I find myself blankly staring off into space, just processing the situation we're in.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh. It's not funny, man. But
it is, though we have to be able to laugh about it too. I mean, there's humor in everything. And if we don't laugh, then it'll just be me staring at that fucking wall blankly for hours,
Yeah, sure. One of the things that I've tried extremely hard to do, especially in the last years, is to respect whoever I'm talking to. And so, that's, for example, why, if you ever do, I don't post, I prefaced this post that I made this morning with I rarely post political things, but before you dismiss this, I'm not attacking anybody. You know what I mean? And I just want you to stop and think about where we are. And it's when I have debates with people who I know are Trump supporters, I can normally get them to concede quite a lot of things. And it's because at the end of the day, I don't yell at them and I don't make them feel stupid for the opinions that they have. I just want to know why. I want to know why you think like this. Where did you get this information from? Why did you check the facts, right? So often I see people sharing shit on social media and I'm like, you can spend 2 minutes researching whether or not what you've just shared is real. How can you just blatantly click retweet? Without looking at it, just look.
Do you want to be that person? Do you want to be that person who's spreading misinformation when it's so easy just to check, just so easy?
Well, and that's the thing. And then they're the ones that are following the fake news guy, the one who's always running around telling everything that, CNN's fake news, MSNBC is fake news, this is fake news, that's fake news. Anybody who doesn't like me is fake news. And I'm like, but you're sharing constant fake shit. And it's so obvious, just spend 5 minutes fact checking it. But the problem is they don't do that. And if you don't have people that are actually fact checking them, but in a respectful way, and that's the point, because they won't listen to the fact check if they think they're being insulted. And so that's what I do is hey, I understand why you've shared this, but maybe there's a few problems with it that we should look into. And let's do that, but let's talk about it. And that's what I'm missing in this world is that everything is sound bites, everything is gotchas. Everything is I'm just looking to this to the other side rather than and show them how stupid they've been. And it's like, well, that's fine. But when, there's people shooting each other in the streets and security forces, like, rounding up political dissidents and putting them in prisons, like what's happened in the past, then who's stupid now, right?
I don't think we're that far off on something like that happening here in the States.
Neither. I think
and I was talking about that with Carly this morning. I was saying, with the way this is going. And the other thing is when you have a party or multiple parties who are willing to give up their rights to win or beat the other party, you're giving up your constitutional rights here in this country. I'm willing to, you take whatever you want. Let's just win, let's win. And what does winning look like when you're giving up your rights? I wonder if it's even thought out.
The other one that drives me crazy is, when I was in university, I had this, basically, I studied international diplomacy and economics at Seton Hall in New Jersey. And, my dissertation was, in sitting with some professors who I'm still in great contact with, was basically centered around this idea that you could divide the world into like different political systems in terms of how they've almost historically always operated. And one of the things that was always so incredible about the West, was that we built a system where you would have a power struggle, but when one side won, they didn't wipe out the other one, which is what's happened in many of the other, like if you look at what happens in Russia, for example, or before that it was Constantinople, or if you look at, the way the Ottomans behaved, or the way, there's somebody that takes over power and then they eliminate their enemies. And, if you look at the dichotomy between the church and the temporal and spiritual power that was happening in Europe, they were always vying for control. Sometimes the Vatican was more powerful than the state, and sometimes the king was more powerful than the church, but they never eliminated each other. In fact, they understood that they needed each other in order to be able to survive. And what's happened now is that we've lost our equilibrium, and we're allowing either one side or the other to basically vow that by the time I get control, I'm going to destroy you. I'm going to rip down everything that you've done, everything that you hold dear, I will undo. And sometimes it's not even because it's good for me, but it's just because fuck you.
Right.
And this is not the way that the West is supposed to behave.
It's not sustainable, that's for sure.
No, for sure not. It's going to end in conflict.
I want to circle back kind of to Europe, where you're at and your experience there. Is there going to be a second lockdown? I've heard talks of this, and how do the people like yourself on the ground feel about a second lockdown? And I would also want to kind of state that a lockdown there is very different than a lockdown here in the States, where I believe in the States we lock down at about 45%, whereas a lockdown in Europe would be closer, I believe, to 90% or something.
It was. So I don't think that we'll ever go back to the 90% lockdown. For me, the game has changed slightly. Back in February, when we started to already march toward a lockdown, 6 weeks before it was happening in the US, the information about what the virus was very, very scarce. We didn't really understand the extent of what it did. We didn't really understand who was vulnerable. And we didn't totally understand how it transmitted. Now we know a lot more. So I think that what I believe is going to happen now here in Europe is that they're going to, whenever the infection rate starts to get too high, I think they're going to change measures so that they slow it down. All the meanwhile, the guidelines of like wearing a mask in public, they remain, and they've remained in place the whole time. They've never been taken away, and nobody has ever encouraged Germans not to, like, for example, in Germany, it's never been like, you don't need to wear a mask, it's cool. Actually, like, public transportation, supermarket, like, you're supposed to wear a mask everywhere that you're indoors. Like, that's the rule. And in fact, you're supposed to also wear a mask when you're walking around outside within the walls of a restaurant. So if you're in a courtyard or something like that, you know, or a patio or a garden or something like that of a venue, if you're moving around, masks. If you're at a festival, and we had some with thousands of people, it was the same story. If you're dancing with people, mask. If you're walking around, mask. The only time you didn't have to wear it is if you were sitting down, socially distanced from someone else, or you were eating. And I think that those measures are going to stay in place for at least a year, if not more. To the extent that there will be more lockdowns, I'm honestly not sure. It's difficult to say. I mean, it's obviously very stressful for us over here too, because, you know, we got early on a bit of assistance from the state for the artist community. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough, at least for me. I was happy with what I had. I could pay, you know, a few months worth of rent. It took the pressure off at the very beginning while we were kind of trying to understand what was going on. I don't think that's coming again. Right. And so I think they know this. They know that, like, they can't really afford to just like take another €1 billion and just give it out to everybody like they did last time that needed it in the self-employed world. So the economic realities are absolutely going to prevent, I think, a 90% lockdown again. But I don't think that we're going to see any return to normalcy in the fall, quite the contrary. And I'm prepared for that.
How does your schedule look right now going into fall and winter with the Trouble Notes? I haven't looked recently.
Yeah, so we've got, I mean, obviously, in July, August, and September, we were really moving around quite a lot. So we were playing festivals. We were, again, all adhering to these guidelines. And, you know, so they were festivals we were supposed to play that were supposed to be for 1,000 people, and they cut it down to 150, you know, and those 150 were put in chairs 2 meters apart from each other, and no dancing was allowed. And, you know, I mean, they really tried to adhere to the rules because, of course, the potential punishment was not cool. Right now, our plan is mostly to stay in Berlin, although we are setting up some smaller socially distanced events in other places. And as long as those places don't become hotspots, we would probably keep those plans in order. So, you know, if we go for, say, a long weekend and we drive to the other side of Germany or into the Netherlands or something like that, as long as there's not massive infection rates where it's becoming dangerous to encourage people to go out, and also for ourselves to be in those areas and potentially come back and infect people, we'll keep it. So we did cancel some dates in France when France started to really have a big explosion. We canceled 3 or 4 dates. That was just 10 days ago, basically. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, we're going to be doing events here in Berlin for 50 people, and they're going to be indoors, and people are going to be wearing masks, and we're going to be encouraging everybody not to lick each other and do crazy things like they normally do in Berlin. But
on my end of things, I've been looking at the information, I've been talking with my wife and talking with folks that I work with in the industry, and there's a general consensus that most of us won't be doing music for 2021, which is a very, very daunting and depressing thought. But
I understand.
The risk doesn't seem worth it, given the rates that we're seeing here and the actions of our government, which are almost non-existent. So that risk, I don't want to endanger one single person to have an event, and it's very different of how it's being handled here, I think. So.
Well, I think to a certain extent that's true. I think also the United States has another problem that's significantly, I don't want to say unique to the U.S., but it has something to do with it. Is that there a lot of buildings in the U.S. have central air, and here, for example, I don't know a single person that has an air conditioner in Berlin. We don't have them. So like my flat, if it's hot, you open the window. Yeah, you get a crosswind and like you're fine. And so like in the restaurants and in these places, like Germans hate it. Like the average German, if you walk into a place and there's an air conditioning on, they'll like go up and be like, please turn the air conditioning off. It's terrible. And like joking, of course. But like that's like really a thing. Like they don't want the air conditioning on, and like Stephanie, she's the manager of our group, and we talked about her last time extensively, and she's my girlfriend as well. And so whenever we're on tour or something like that, if we stay in a hotel and they have an air conditioning on, she's like freaking out in the bedroom trying to turn it off. Like it won't shut off. Terrible, She hates it, and so I think that's also been a reason why like the rates in the summer really shut down. Because even though people were mostly outside, and of course Europe has a unique outdoor culture that the US does not have, we don't sit in air-conditioned rooms. We don't sit in restaurants where there's central air blowing, one person coughs and it's like everybody's had it, you know what I mean? They've all breathed it in at that point. And like we don't have that here. Just don't have it.
I did not know that because I live by air conditioning. I probably have like 125 pounds on you. But man, when I walk into a room, if there's an air conditioner, it's getting turned on, and it's getting turned on low.
Yeah, I understand, man. But that's the funny thing is like, like here they just don't have it, and it's funny. Like it's really it's like two things. There's that, and there's ice cubes. Like my father, whenever he comes over here, they stay. Like once he was here in the summer, and he's like, I don't understand, like because he puts ice cubes in everything, and he drinks ice water. And they don't have, he can't buy it. And he was like so miffed, like, we can't put any ice in this country, it's shit. And I'm just like,
why isn't there ice? What's the deal?
I don't know. People just don't drink it, and they make it themselves in the fridge. They don't go to the store and buy bags of ice.
I see.
You know what I mean? Like you can't find it. Like it's just hard to find. You can, but you have to go to like a specific like Getränkmarkt, like a drink market, to buy like bagged ice. And I just don't know anybody that does it. When we were in that lockdown period, we wrote a lot of music, and so like we've been releasing stuff the last months. It's been really great. We released some different singles that are kind of all over the place. It was like the ones that we didn't know what to do with, and they're strong in each in their own right, and like the feedback has been excellent so far. And then of course we've got now this animated series that we're working on, which like the first episode hopefully is going to come out at the end of November. It's almost done, but one of the artists actually has COVID-19. So she's in the south of France, and I think she's doing okay. She's quite young, but like she has asthma, so I knocked her on her ass. And like we haven't announced the release date yet, so I'm already kind of telling you end of November. It could be later, but we made an entire album centered around a futuristic kind of space story, and it was very cool to make, very fun. And now, we're looking at like at least releasing the first episode and song, and then afterwards we'll see how we're going to manage it. But I think we don't want to sit on it for too much longer because it's already been since like May.
What do you do with that? How is that used?
Which part?
What do you do with an animated, like how is it distributed? How is it used as a tool, or is it, I'm trying to understand what it is. Yeah. Why'd you do it? What is this?
Well, so like we made this really crazy story, man. Like it's a crazy story. It's a really cool story. It's like futuristic, but it also has like twists and turns, and so we just, I don't know, like we just were sitting in the studio and we're like, how dope would it be if we could find somebody that could just make an animated film about it, with each episode? Because like obviously because the songs don't have words, so it's like to see the story and not just like write it. Because like originally thought about that, like, okay, do we do like spoken word, or do we create some sort of storybook with like pictures that could define like what's happening? And it was like, well, obviously animation is the best. And I don't, you know how the universe, like sometimes you just call out for something and it comes. So like there was a girl that, you know, from the south of France that sent us this video, and she was like, yeah, I'm an art student and I made this animated film and with your music. And she sent it to us, and it was a totally different style, like stop motion. And we were like, wow, this is really cool. You know, you're at an art school in France, and like, would you ever be willing to like maybe think about collaborating with us on this project? And then she just was like mega motivated and was just like, yeah, I've got friends that are artists and we do this and this. And she started sending me their work, and we're looking like, holy shit, these kids are awesome. They're like 19 years old and they're making like Japanese anime style stuff. And so I don't know, we all just got all hopped up on each other's energy. And the next thing we know, they're like, yeah, we'll do this. And so they did it, like, you know, and it was so innocent and cute and amazing because they're like 19 and 20 years old, I think, or something like that. And we were like, yeah, we want to pay you something. And they were like, oh yeah, we made the first episode, you know, which is obviously a shitload of work. And we were like, well, you never told us what you want for it. And they were like, well, we never really thought about it. We just wanted to do it, you know? And I was like, I love you kids. You're so amazing. So we're going to have to do like a whole, like we got them to do the first one, and it's a 7-song album. It's going to require a lot more work to do the rest of it. So I think we'll have to do some sort of like big crowdfunding campaign or something in order to be able to get the money to compensate them for the rest, because they can't do that much work for free. It's not fair.
I love the idea. I didn't want to give the impression that I
no. I totally get your reaction.
Amazing.
It's just like, what the fuck are you guys doing, man?
And now
like,
what? You've got an animated thing. Now what?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's the problem. We got to think about that, because we got to release it, and obviously we run our own label, so it's like, then how are we going to do it all? And I mean, we're on it, you know, because also the style is super different. It's like rocky and really, it's cool. It's cool. It's the songs are cool. They're catchy. Some of them. They're like more like prog rock though, a little bit more. So It's a different style from us, but definitely dope. And they're like cosmic, and yeah, man, it's cool.
I can't wait to see this, man. I'm excited to see this product. That's great.
So we'll release that, I think, at the end of the year. Well, at least the first episode, and then I think maybe we'll just drop the whole album with like a write up, and then have the episodes come out later. We'll probably drop it in like the beginning of next year.
Bennett, thank you so much for your time. I hope you guys stay safe over there. I hope that things improve. And I always appreciate you taking the time to talk to us and your perspective, which I have a lot of respect for. So thank you.
Cheers, man. I just want to say one last thing maybe is, you know, I think for a little while we sound pretty doom and gloom about stuff. And I still hold a little bit of optimism that if we can somehow mobilize, and at least the people that are kind of in the very wide center of this whole thing, you know, and kind of just get them to understand that they now more than ever have a role of kind of like talking to the people that are on either side of them, that will listen and say, hey buddy, dial it back a little bit and like get over here, we need to talk about some things. And I think if we can do that in a very peaceful, respectful way, then maybe we'll be able to divert something really horrible from happening and just maybe settle for something that's not so great. But not so great is maybe better than really horrible, I think, I hope.
Thank you for listening to Galaxy Tenants. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, like, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. For early access to episodes and exclusive content, check us out on Patreon. Also, if you'd like to communicate with us, send an email to galaxytenants@gmail.com or leave a voicemail on the Galaxy Tenants hotline at 303-550-2065.
You've reached the Galaxy Tenants hotline. Please leave a message.
Meow 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 meow.